Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Scenario Playthrough series, where I try and apply some of my real-life park design principles to RCT. We're on scenario number 5 today. This is Evergreen Gardens. We got to get 1,000 people by the end of October year 4 and have a rating of at least 600. So this is our first 4-digit guest goal, and we've got a pretty sprawling park to do it in. That's actually one of the challenges of this park for sure. There's so many pathways that you really need to cut down on the access that guests have initially until you kind of fill out the park, or you're going to have a lot of very lost guests and guests that aren't riding your rides because they're not in the queues. So we're going to go ahead and sort out down to roller coasters and thrill rides to start, and kind of take a look at what we're working with right now. I want to start out like I usually do with some kind of centerpiece type ride. It's going to be our carousel. I want to put this up onto a little bit of a platform so it's at least somewhat viewable as you come in. The gardens as a whole in this map are really nice, and I want to try and generally maintain that vibe, but I don't want to have a lot of just kind of like one-off rides scattered about. I do kind of want to cluster them a little bit. It's a little easier said than done trying to work around existing gardens rather than kind of making your own. So I feel like this often kind of becomes a lesson in kind of how not to destroy as much of the natural landscape as you can. So we're going to basically try and do our best that we can in that nature. So getting our carousel here stuck in with kind of a nice big walkway around it. I would love to do a plaza just because plazas kind of are the key element in path making in kind of the custom scenery type parks that I do, and of course in real life. But we're trying to avoid the whole one or more than one wide pathway thing, because the RCT1 peeps don't really like that so much. But we have our nice little landscaped center area there, so contributing to the gardens in our own little way. But now I'm kind of looking at what's next up here. You come in through this kind of nice valley, so it would be kind of a neat way to introduce the rides to some guests as they walk in by getting something along that valley. But before that, we're going to stick a scrambler in here just because it's a kind of easy button type ride. We'll stick it right here along the water, nice view, and also not too far from the carousel at least as well. So as we kind of look around to see what we have to work with, I know we're zooming around a little bit here, but hopefully the 4 times speed is a little bit better than what we have before. And by the way, if you do want to see these in real time, and as I do them on stream, I do stream every one of these on twitch.tv/amusement academy, so you can definitely check that out. I will put a link down in the description to the streams. As of this recording, I am one more scenario ahead of this one now, so we do try and keep a little bit ahead. But now for the first coaster. So we're going to do a junior coaster. The general idea behind this one is kind of Zierer Tivoli type coaster, where we're just kind of meandering around the space. I'm going to try and use this hillside a little bit, so that's what you see here as I'm trying to iterate some options. Looking at initially a straight drop here, and we're going to revise that in a little bit. My goal is to generally keep it on to the one side of the pathway here. I want it just kind of up on the hillside, not necessarily all around you as you come in. I mean, the idea of an entrance is that you have a little bit of a decompression space, so you can really kind of get in, get your bearings, get situated, and then as you get a little further into the park, then you start to get to your first attractions that you can go ride, and now you're kind of ready to experience the park. So in general, my goal was not to have any attractions until effectively you get up to where the carousel is, which was the goal that I think we did accomplish here. So we're generally going okay along the side of the hill here. We did do a little bit of a tunnel, and I've said in previous builds that I don't generally encourage tunnels, and I still don't. Small tunnels in this regard I think are more or less okay. It's definitely going to cost the park more to do that, so they're really only going to do it if they have the extra capital to do so, and it makes sense for them to add that element. But since we have such a huge landscape elevation change here, I think it does make sense to use it on occasion. And we'll do a monorail here a little later that's going to have a fair number of tunnels, and maybe we're stemming a little further out of the realm of total realism, but I think in some cases it's probably alright. Now here we're adjusting the station and the brake run to come in cleanly. I don't tend to like using S-bends if we can avoid it, so especially coming either into the brakes or into the station, so we're going to adjust it ever so slightly coming into the lift hill so we can have a nice clean brake run, turn, and go into the station as well. On these brake runs, I do, we'll call it cheat a little bit. It's not really, but I do tend to put a block brake at the very start of the brake run, only so we can clear that block so the next train can get off of the lift hill sooner. You know, the coaster could stop there if the block was full in front of it, but it's never going to be because we've only got the 2 trains. So it's basically just sort of a dummy block to help advance the ride just a little sooner along, which, you know, would be fine in real life. You just don't have the finite ability to control stuff like you do in real life here. So this is our first coaster. You know, it's okay, just a little meandering bit of family coaster. Nice purple color. I think it looks good against the greenery. We'll give those landscape walls a little bit of that wood texture, also do a bit of landscaping here, not too much. Trying to balance that whole manicured yard feel versus the more kind of wilderness look where we're doing the dirt and grass and the darker green bushes and that kind of thing. So we're going to try and strike a balance through the whole thing. I'm going to widen up this plaza just a little bit to just give it a little bit more depth and, you know, sort of simulate that plaza even without having the double or larger wide pathways. So we'll do it just like this. Gives us a nice little center area as well. You know, if I had maybe some more money at this point, I might look at doing some more terraced type things, but I want to be at least a little conservative of our money initially, just to make sure that we can get ourselves through and start to get a park that can generate some good income before we get too far down the line. So we've only got a limited section of pathway open right now, and that's just to keep people from getting lost. We will drop in this haunted house up at the top of this hill. Another thing that I've complained about in a couple of different streams or videos here so far is vertical or inclined pathways. I don't like to do more than 2 at a time just because you don't really see that. You generally see landings in between, just from a ADA standpoint and just in general good design practice. You don't really see these huge walkways, but unfortunately this park is kind of full of them. It is something that I would kind of like to adjust out of it. It would mean more or less tearing up some of the hillside, which is less ideal perhaps, but I think it's probably okay just to leave it in this sense for this one, just because it is more of this sort of natural garden or botanical garden type look to the whole thing. We did a little bit of texture change for the pathway up there. We also used what we call the spooky fence, just because it does fit very well in there, and also use those flowers that I feel like kind of, for me, always become the spooky flowers as well. So that worked pretty nicely just to sit up there on the precipice. Always try and find a good spot for those haunted houses just because it feels like, you might as well make it an icon. We'll do our little swan boats there too. Always make the one black, which I think was a Kitty's World scenario thing where I had first seen that, and now it's just a habit that I have every time I use it. So now we've unlocked a number of coasters. We got something to work with at least there. And one of the things that I wanted to do too is get a monorail in this place. Initially, I thought about doing sort of 2 monorails that had the shared station in the middle, and then one went to the left and one went to the right. It was a decent thought maybe, but in the end, I didn't end up going that way. So just am going to end up doing a 3-station monorail. But in order to do that, we don't really have the money to afford it right now, the whole thing. But I also don't want to box us in too much. So I'm going to at least start to place things down as we go along. And that way we can at least plan for it ahead of time as we're going through. So now we're going to get into this first of the big guy coasters here. So we're going to use a corkscrew coaster here and make ourselves an Arrow custom looping coaster. This one is going to be based on a coaster called Crazy Roller Coaster. Yes, that's the name. From Nanhu Amusement Park in China. It has since been closed, unfortunately, but it had a really kind of interesting backwards inversion order on the side of a hill, and ended up looking like just a pretty cool, interesting, unique ride, I suppose. So we get our double corkscrew at the very beginning rather than at the end, as you typically saw. A reverse sidewinder there, which is what Arrow called their dive loop element, and then a loop as well, and those are going to be our 4 inversions. So now we're going to try and sort out how we want to build a lift hill and how we want to integrate this whole thing. So just trying to use the hillside here to our advantage if possible. So we've got ourselves a curving drop, and I feel like that's probably a good start to it. I like the curving drop into the banked corner and then into the corkscrew, so you can kind of imagine if this were just a little bit smoother, maybe you have that almost as a continuous roll into that first element. And then we'll extend that drop just a little bit so that we can get this lift hill to just very nicely feed underneath of the turn here, and also down the side of the mountain without having to mess with it. So that's a win for sure. Now we got to figure out how to finish it. A lot of times I build backwards from the station just because it is a little bit easier to make sure that you get a full brake run in there and you don't miss anything, because it can be very easy to kind of forget that, oh yeah, I need to stop the whole train plus more. Generally, my rule of thumb, if you're looking for size of brake run, is that you want it to be the full length of your train plus at least half more, and then that goes up for every additional train that you have. That you should definitely try and add an additional train length worth of brake run there. You know, if you got 3 trains, you want to be able to stack 2 of them plus have a section for it to slow down. So you want 2.5 times a train length for a brake run with a 3 train operation. So now I'm doing something a little more oddball here, just not necessarily your typical Arrow inversion order, but Arrows, especially the Arrow custom looping coasters, did tend to do these kind of ending helixes, usually not kind of up high and in such a prominent place like this, but I thought it might be an interesting way to do it. So this is one option here to close it in, but I didn't necessarily like how small that helix was, so we're going to end up adjusting this to be a little bit larger. This kind of goes along with something like Orient Express that had a helix at the end, or Vortex at Kings Island that also did the same thing, and Loch Ness Monster is kind of a more famous one, I suppose, that has the helix as well, but theirs is enclosed. That one's also fairly substantial, so we're going to do something similar to the scale of that one with the big helix here, so it maybe looks a little bit nicer. It's always, you know, this one kind of looks too big and the other one kind of looks too small, so it's something that you got to decide, you know, which one is the best in the end. And I think this one ended up being the right one for us here. So now we can get ourselves a brake run, but we're left with this kind of huge gap to the station, which I didn't necessarily want to have that kind of long no man's land there, so instead of that, we're going to go ahead and do a little kind of pre-drop thing going on here, give ourselves a station, and then have our brake run there just naturally flow into the thing. So I think that works, you know, quite well for this. Now we'll wrap our queue up and around this whole little Roman area. We don't have any of the theming elements right now. We are going to unlock Roman later. A little bit surprising that was the only option for additional theming to do here. For some reason, I thought this map had a few others, but it did not. So we'll deal with what we have to work with. Raised a little bit of that landscape there in the middle of the helix just to give it this sort of kind of cool rockwork thing and give that helix a reason to be there, so you can kind of interact with that little bit of landscaping as well. We'll go over top of the coaster for the exit there, give a little bit of pathway interaction, connect up that pathway too, and then there we go. We've got ourselves a headliner coaster, so that's a good one there. I think it sits pretty nicely into the landscape. We looked at a couple of different options for color schemes too. You know, the red is sort of a classic look, and I did like that kind of default type scheme initially. We're going to change it up a little bit more as we go through, but it was a decent start, I think. Also thought about white, more of the kind of Japanese type jet coaster look, and also maybe something fitting more into the natural look. We're going to do something that's white a little later on. Here is the color scheme of Crazy Coaster that we based this one off of. That kind of pink and green, and sort of think of a watermelon for whatever reason with that color scheme. Or this kind of green that blends into everything. That seems like more of a European type color scheme, which I guess, to be honest, in a park like this where it is more kind of garden focused, this does seem to me like more of a European type park. But in the end, we ended up going back to the red and with the darker red support, so we kind of went with that Orient Express at Worlds of Fun type feel, and I'm pretty happy with how that one turned out. So now we'll start to extend the monorail just a little bit and give that a little bit of space so we kind of get going. Also, at this point is when I realized I had not hired any staff yet, so whoops. You can definitely tell I don't play the scenarios terribly much because I kind of forget about a lot of those things, and I'm usually kind of cheap at the beginning too, so I don't want to hire a lot of staff because then I'm paying a lot of bills, and I don't need to be doing that because we're trying to make money at this stage. So we'll do a little bit of housekeeping here, put some fencing in, get a little bit of a tree berm in there so we have this kind of coaster shooting through the middle of the trees and kind of coming over top of this plaza, which I think would be kind of a cool visual too. And then you've got that helix sort of looming up above on the hillside. So thinking about this from a guest perspective, I actually think that's kind of a neat look. To me, it kind of would be cool to stand there and see. So we've got this huge flower garden area here, and one of the suggestions that I had in the chat was to make this into a maze. So rather than use the flowers here, we're going to use the hedge maze. And I don't do a lot of these mazes, but I feel like they are a pretty creative outlet for a bit of building. So we're going to use the hedge maze. We're going to use the green hedge rather than the wood or brick that you have as another option, or ice, I guess. So I'm going to replace basically all of the flowers that would have been accessible from those pathways and fill in this whole thing. Thinking through it now, if I would have spent a little bit more time on this and kind of made a proper pattern with the hedge, I think that could have been maybe a little more aesthetically pleasing, but at this point we're just kind of going for a bit of a randomness feel to it. As long as the maze is completable, I don't care really how many ways it's completable, as long as you can get through it, and I don't have to worry about the peeps getting totally lost. So here we are, kind of basically replacing this flower garden with a maze, and I think it's maybe a decent way to rework that. I'm going to put back the fencing on the outside too, just so we still have the overall look of this, and then of course along the queue and along the exit pathway we do still have the flowers that are originally there, and then those two little kind of interior pathways there, I'll raise that up so you can actually look down into the maze. I always sort of like having some kind of a visual that goes down into the maze nearby, so that anybody who doesn't want to go ride, or I guess it's not really a ride, but anybody who doesn't want to go experience the thing can get a kind of first-hand look at the maze. So here's our second one. We're gonna drop in number 2 here and put this in. So we basically have a mirror image at this point. I don't really think these are going to bring in a lot of guests. I don't think this raises the soft guest gap by a whole heck of a lot, but at this point, as long as we're basically consistently building, we're going to be okay. I'm not too worried about the goal on this one, just because we're kind of continuously building stuff, and as long as we get a couple of big coasters in here and a number of other rides, we should be just fine to hit our goal. Park rating is never an issue, to be honest. 600 is a stupidly low park rating goal, and that's never really been an issue to try and beat that, so we won't have any troubles there. And worst case, we can always default over to the advertisements if we need to get a couple of peeps in here at the end, but hopefully we won't need to do that either. I am doing the pay per ride on this scenario in particular, just because I'm trying to use the money that I get from the attractions rather than having to worry more about general admission on the way in. It's kind of a toss-up which way you go. For me, I find that it's a little bit easier to do it this way. I like the pay-per-ride option generally. Not to say that I don't use the on-entry payment either. I actually did earlier in one of the other scenarios, but in this case, we're going to stick with the pay-per-ride. So now here we're expanding this monorail, making sure that we don't totally box ourselves in. Unfortunately, we've already actually built the other rides, so we are kind of squeezing it in a little bit here, but that's okay. I feel like it gives it a good natural look. In a lot of cases, the monorails are usually one of the earlier things that were built in the park, so it's not necessarily a later addition, because usually a park's not going to invest in a monorail sort of incrementally. It's going to be an opening day attraction, usually, just because it's a fairly expensive ride since it kind of meanders all around, and you're generally not going to get a good bang for your buck on that one as a park, just because it's not going to draw in gate attendants like, say, a coaster would, or really any other kind of ride necessarily. So very rarely do you see a park add a monorail. Usually it's one of those kind of opening day things when it's a little easier to lump in ride builds with the overall park construction. So you got to think that in mind. Think through kind of the idea of when each of the things in your park may have been built, and that way it makes it look like one came before the other necessarily, or we didn't have to rework a whole bunch of things to get around a ride that theoretically opened later than the first one. So over here on the side, I'm thinking about a couple of different things. So thought about a tower ride here, but in the end I went in a different direction. We will see those tower rides come back a little later here, but at this point I'm going to simplify this pathway just a little bit, and I think it's about time for a car ride in here. The car rides I feel like are kind of an underrated thing in the game, because I really never built these, to be honest, just because they're kind of limited in terms of your construction. You can't do a whole lot of them, but you do have a decent variety of vehicles to work with, so that's kind of nice. I mean, your standard ones is the trucks and the racing cars and the sports cars. You can also get the vintage ones and the Cheshire Cats as well. So there's a lot of different options for vehicles for one, and I feel like they're just really good filler track rides because they can fit in pretty much any space. They don't have to be gigantic. Like, this is probably a medium to large size one, but they don't have to be. So they can just fill in a smaller space if that's all you have the space for. But I think they're a good fit, and it makes plenty of sense, in my opinion, to have more than one as well. So I'm a big fan of trying to fit a number of these in, and I think as you see more scenarios here moving forward, you're going to probably see us do more of the car rides than just one, for sure. So I'm adding a little bit of theming here, doing some of these kind of for hedge fences. I always think those look kind of nice, and I'm going to clear out the front here and do this sort of topiary garden thing with these circular topiaries, just kind of scatter the small and the large ones in here. So it's a decent look, I think. And then on the end, or I guess in the middle, we're going to put these other different topiaries. Got the cone shaped things, there's the dog, there's the gator. So I think it all works pretty well. Use this existing little plaza there with a couple of drink stalls, because I don't tend to remember to put more stalls in after I start going through. Like, I always have the ones there at the front, but sometimes I kind of forget to do the other ones. Same with restrooms, and then I always sort of retroactively stick them in. So trying to at least be a little more cognizant of that, and maybe on the ball a little more than I would be otherwise, and put them in now. Not that we have a huge selection. Generally, if I've got a food and if I got a drink, then I'm good to go. I don't really research that until later, because to me, if I have a limited time to do the scenario, and all things considered, the peeps don't really care about variety, as long as they've got something to fulfill the drink needs and something to fulfill the food needs, in general it's fine, and I will rather get the rides than I would to get the stalls. So that's usually a late game thing for me as we play through these. So looking at the monorail now, we're going forward out of the station, trying to figure out how we want to do this. Initially, I looked at kind of wrapping it around the back of this coaster here, but I really got into the landscaping up against the side of the map, which I don't tend to like, especially because you can't smooth that out since you don't own the land. So we're actually just going to wrap it around on the opposite side of the pathway from the coaster, and then I'm going to come right through the middle here and go underneath the ride and then go into our first tunnel. Now, like I said earlier, we are going to do a number of tunnels on the monorail, which, you know, as an opening day type attraction, I feel like it's at least a little more acceptable, because you would think that a lot of these hills may have been man-made, especially with the way that they're shaped. So I feel like that's maybe an easier argument to make than you know, having a coaster with a whole bunch of tunnels and things that would have been added later. So I'm okay with the tunnel, and we're going to go right on through this hillside here. One of the things that I'm always paying attention to is the elevation, trying not to change the elevation too much, just by the very nature of the ride piece with the slopes on this. Same with the train. I just don't think it looks good when you have slope changes here, and especially the way that it adjusts the speed. I don't really want to see that. I'd rather it be consistently consistent speed throughout, and just I think it looks a lot better when you don't have hills in trains or monorails on the rides. So if you must, I feel like I kind of want to bury that in a tunnel, if anything, but we're not going to even do that this time. I want to keep it flat the whole way through. So let's take a swinging ship over here as we kind of expand a little further into the map, do a little bit of our usual landscaping here. So we check that box of, hey, it's by the water, and B, hide that stupid kind of supports that you have to deal with at the edge of the thing. So now, turning our attention back to the front here, I'll put in the queue, even though we're not going to open this monorail for a good while. You know, we're on year 2 right now, and I don't think I open this until year 4. But that's okay. I think we just want to prep for it right now. So initially, I looked at sticking a second car ride up here, just because we've got this nice flat space. But then I had a suggestion in chat to do a kind of water type, almost like a river rafts type ride. And so that's what I started with up here, is just kind of putting a nice meandering water ride in here. Initially, I wasn't planning on doing any drops, you know, taking the stat penalty for that and just kind of dealing with it. But then I got the suggestion to maybe make a little bit of a drop here, right kind of up above the entrance. So we're going to deal with some interesting landscaping here and do a nice little climb and drop. So not a huge one. Actually, we're going to go a little smaller than this even still, and build this in. So I'm going to clear out some of the trees there. So as you come in, you can kind of look up and see this ride. So there's our little bit of a splashdown. And I'm going to actually use the reverser turntable. Not something I usually use either, but it was a suggestion in chat, so it's maybe a little bit of an odd thing to go down the only drop on the ride backwards, but, you know, hey, why not? We're you know, experimenting here. So now that I've got this, one of the thoughts was, okay, well, you come in and you look up at this thing. Are you just looking at the bottom of a metal ride trough, or what are you doing? So you know, thinking through that as we drop a queue in here, just kind of fitting it through, rolling it underneath of this corkscrew, so at least we have a little bit of interaction. In real life, we'd have some nets under there, although I guess if this is a European park, we can forego that, because less litigation, which is always kind of nice. No real theming here because we don't have like any mine scenery or anything, so we're just going to drop a crap load of trees and just kind of make it a nice thicker landscape here. Put in a bunch of these bushes, go with our dirt and grass. And it's amazing how much a little bit of that dirt and grass really livens up the whole thing. I think it's a good look for all of that. Also put some fencing in there. We're going to separate the queue for the monorail with the ride itself. And now we're going to get into this front thing. And this is a little more wild than I'll typically do in scenario play for one. We're going to build ourselves a waterfall. Because we don't have the waterfall pieces like you have in RCT 2, we're going to use an old trick from new element park building and just use the icy walls for simulating a waterfall. So we're just going to go ahead and change that so it at least looks like it could be a waterfall, which is fine with me. You know, that simulates it decently enough. You got to use your imagination a little bit, but that's okay. This whole game is about using your imagination. So I've got a little bit of a splashdown pool up high here, and then down below I am going to use a couple of rapids ride pieces just to give it a little bit of movement, at least, just to kind of make it look like that waterfall is splashing into something. So now it turns into a little centerpiece for the entrance to the park. So as you come in, you get not only a cool water feature, but then you can look up at the top and you can see these little bit of log flume boats just kind of cruising around the top also. Only challenge you run into with this kind of thing is now we're stuck with a basically a pond that's up high. So in the end, we're going to get rid of this entire little bit of a hillside here just to make it make sense. And it's still, you got to use your imagination a little bit here, but we're going to do a little bit of landscaping. We have enough money that we can do this now without totally being a hog to our funding. So I think that's probably okay. Drop a little bit in here. Not really a clear space for a fountain, so we'll leave that off. At the time, I didn't realize you don't get mine scenery on this. I was kind of hoping to have that a little bit later to add a little bit of theming vibe to the whole thing, but we didn't have it, so that's okay. But this concludes our part 1 of our playthrough here. We'll tune in next time for part number 2. We're going to get into 2 more large coasters and a couple of other attractions and some other things. But come on back to check that out, and hope to see you then. So I'll see you later.